Is everybody sitting down? Thank you for being here today. We are starting now for the people here are in the room and the people online. Thank you for joining us today here from Lille in France. This is already the 4th event of the event series with each month with a different European thematic community, an event in a different country of Europe. We already had an event in Cologne with the digital affairs community. We had an event with the health community in Krakow in Poland. Last month we had an event with the defense and security community in Prague in Czech Republic. And now here we're today with the tourism, housing and mobility community in Lille in France with the amazing Volt Lille community. And we're going to talk about the future of housing and mobility. Le futur du logement et de la mobilité. Sorry, my French isn't that good, but we have here a French translation on the spot. We will have 2 speakers. The first one is Simon Dahy, co-policy lead for Volt France and our dedicated housing expert. Afterwards, we have a presentation by Bram Vandeninden. He was our number 2 on the European Parliament list for Volt Belgium and our mobility expert. They will give a presentation and afterwards we'll have a discussion, panel discussion to talk about the future of housing and mobility. Let's start. The floor is yours. Just to be sure, I give you this one.
Okay. Thanks. Hi, everyone. So for my part, I will be speaking about the relation between housing and demographics, because housing policies isn't just about building houses. If you have a problem, you just say, okay, we will build more and just don't think more about it. There's other factors that come together, and we should be maybe a bit more clever in our approach to housing problems. Today, we are faced with a demographic evolution of our societies. If you think of housing, you will have a classical, typical image of a house with maybe 1 or 2 floors, a small garden, a family, a dog maybe. But this kind of family model is less and less the majority in our societies. If we took an example, by 2050, there will be in France a rise of 3.5 million of households. It is not a rise in the population, it is that there are more and more people that are living alone or with families that are remodeled. So, for example, single-parent families and so on, couples that are separating. And this change that we are observing in our societies, and that is only going on, is just beginning. And our housing park is not well adapted to this. It's not thought to this end, and it is rigid in this regard. We have this picture of we need to own a house, buy a house, that it is a social achievement. But today, we need more and more mobility. I don't know if you heard this saying, but we often heard that our generation won't have the same work all their lives. And this is also linked to housing. Because when you change work, you maybe want to change city, to move to a new city, to find new opportunities. And if you can't find a house, you can't move to another city. So that creates also frictional unemployment. So it's really linked to multiple factors. And if you look at the stages of life, there's a really different type of needs that in terms of space or housing accommodations. When you live alone, to study alone. You don't need a lot of rooms. When maybe you find a partner and you go together. When maybe you have children and you need bigger space. When your children go away, you have a lot of space that you don't use. And then you grow elderly and maybe your houses with stairs becomes not adapted to your lack of mobility. So we see that today there's really an evolution and that we need different types of housing units, depending on our stage of our life. And it creates, and there are also great problems with separations. To take an example, in Paris, you have only 9,000 housing units available a year from the social park. But you need to relocate 111,000 women who are victims of violence. So this housing crisis locks people in. You lose job opportunities, student opportunities. You're forced to stay with people you're not together anymore. It really prevents your personal opportunities. And a housing park is too rigid. It is mostly based on the same model and have difficulties to propose suitable and well-adapted typology of housing to people who need it at the different stages of their lives. If we look at some numbers, we see that in France, there's a lot of households which are living in housing units that are too big for them. So it's called they're undercrowded, so it's the purple part of the charts. So it's bigger, of course, in the land and outside the big cities, but it's also present in Paris. So it's something that's really a general phenomenon. And when I say that there is rigidity, it's also in the way we can move around and find new housing units, whether it is buying a new house or just locating a new one. If we look at the turnover rate, which is the rate of the housing units that are freed every year, it is in France at an all-time low. It has diminished by 2 points in the last 2 years to go to 6.5%. So we have housing buildings that are not well adapted to the demands of our today's society, and moreover, there's no fluidity and mobility within this housing system. So when we see this, I hope it shows that beyond building more bricks and just building more buildings, there's a question about how we use the buildings, how we shape them, what kind of housing type we create. It's not just about building more, it's also how we build things in a clever way and how we can reuse existing buildings in a clever way. And to this end, there's something that in what we really believe in is building reliable data. Because it's all well and good to say this thing, but if you don't know the number or the needs of the population, you cannot adapt your public policies. That's why it is really important and key to us to have reliable data of existing needs of a society to adapt our public policies and to be able to measure the effects that our public policies will have. Because if you pass a law and you say, okay, it has improved, but you don't know the effect of a law, it's complicated to create something new after. Okay, do you keep a law? Do you change it? Do you know what worked and what didn't work? You don't know, simply don't know. So in France, we propose two things. There's something that is called Programmes locaux de l'habitat, so local housing programs. And today, it studies the evolution of the population in some local sectors. For example, in Lille, it shows that, okay, there's a rise in population, so we will have more demand. That's good, but it lacks this analysis skill that we spoke about what type of households will come to Lille, Will it be students? Will it be families with children? Will it be elderly people? And this changes the type of demand in housing that you will have to answer as a public administration. That's why we want to add an analysis of those social household needs in this programme locaux de l'habitat. And in the same way, in the programs that are piloting housing policy from in the administration, so the schéma de cohérence territoriale, which is territorial coherence schemes, we want to use the demand in small typology of housing. So in France, we say T1 or T2, which corresponds to the number 1 or 2 is the number of rooms besides the kitchen and the bathroom. So T1 is very tiny apartment for students, typically. And we need to add the need in those typology to our strategies in local housing. So that's really the first point. If we want to act on this, we need data and we need information to know how much we need to act and in which direction exactly. But when we know that, we, of course, need to implement political action. And there's really two major things that we think we should go toward. First thing is to facilitate residential mobility, meaning that it should be easier for people to change houses depending on the stage of their life which they are in. So that your children leave the house, maybe you want to go to something that is smaller, for example. So it's really about fluidify the housing market. And the second main point is to diversify the typologies available in a housing park. Because today it's too much of the same thing, and it's not, as we've seen, it's often not well adapted, because there's also people that are living in overcrowded spaces. And at the same time, there are people that are living in undercrowded spaces. So there's really an exchange that can be done. And to this end, for example, there's in France a lot of build grounds that exist and that we could reuse to this end. For example, there's a lot of office grounds that are currently unoccupied and that could maybe be reused for housing purposes. And it is the same for older mansions that were built for a whole family with servants and so on. And today we try to separate that in tiny apartments. But maybe a way that we could have to reuse them properly would be to develop co-proprietary systems and so on. So rather than building more, we could try to find a more clever approach of the existing park and trying to use it to the most of its potential and to further develop the leads that we could implement policy-wise. I propose to you that we discuss it together openly in our participatory session that we have later today. And that's about all for my part. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you, Simon, for this amazing first talk on housing, the future of housing, the problems around typology within the housing, but also, for example, the ideas of converting, for example, office building into housing as a potential solution. We have some questions already prepared, but there are probably some questions from the audience already, but we'll save them for when also Bram has his presentation. So that will come later. It's not only about housing. It is important, but housing really relates to also infrastructure, mobility, because you can build a house somewhere, but if there is no road in front of it or no access to a bike path or public transport, what type of housing what kind of life can you then live in there? So now we'll have a short talk by Bram Vandeninden on the relation of mobility and infrastructure towards housing. Here is Bram.
Thank you, Christian. So good afternoon. We will now dive deeper into more the relation between housing and mobility and transport. So I'm Bram. I'm active in the European policy team of Volt Europa. I'm also active on the Belgian level of Volt. And as Christian mentioned, I was the number 2 on the European list for the European elections back in June. Outside Volt, I'm now completing a PhD research in which I mainly focus on what are the health effects of urban and transport planning. So it's also a bit related to what we will discuss today. So I have no slides, so there will nothing appear on the screen. I will just tell some stories. So first, of course, it's important to tackle housing and mobility and transport together. Now they're too often seen as separate issues, certainly when it comes to policy. To start with an example, like housing prices are often cheaper, lower in the outskirts of a city and suburban areas far away from the city center and in rural areas. And I also know many young people who actually they would prefer to live in the city center without a car, but they cannot afford to live there, and then rent or buy something more outside the city center where it's cheaper and where they need to have a car for daily travel. And so there are two aspects we need to consider. First, when we need a lot of new housing projects in the future, because also housing prices, rent prices are high, and we need more supply to lower the prices. But preferably, we should do that very carefully, with also integrating mobility and transport into new housing plans. There are some good European examples. For example, often in Switzerland, they before they start building the houses for a new housing project, they build a tramway and they build education facilities, schools before they build houses. But it's rather an exception in many places in Europe, certainly in Belgium. New housing projects are built and they see all about the services and transport later, when it's often too late. The first important point is to, of course, integrate mobility into new housing projects, and of course, second, try to fix the problems in existing places, because of course there is a lot of urban sprawl, a lot of housing, built in spots not very good located to use public transport or the like cycling infrastructure. And of course, we should also try to fix the existing places, also because housing and mobility, it's first related to people's daily life, how their freedom to travel without a car, but also it's also linked to health, climate, and economy, actually. So to fix the problems in existing places, there are also some points that were part of the Volt Europa moonshot program for the European elections back in June. Some of the points proposed in the program were, for example, affordable and accessible local transportation for all Europeans, direct funding for green infrastructure in cities, and promoting the concept of 15-minute communities. Also built, then it's less local and more global, to build expand the high-speed rail network and make every city with more than 100,000 people accessible through high-speed rail. And when we look more to the health side, one of the program points is also to achieve the World Health Organization guidelines on air pollution and green space, meaning that exposure of people to nitrogen dioxide and particulate matter is below a certain threshold, and there is sufficient green space available everywhere for close to people's residence. Two other points that are important. I give the example of building a tramway before building the housing project. It was on purpose that I said tram and not bus, because for many studies, it's also clear that actually trams are often more successful than buses. For example, here in France, for example, in the city of Dijon, a new tramway was operated around 2012, and actually the passenger numbers exceed all expectations beforehand. So beforehand there were theoretical simulations of how many people will use it. And what usually is seen in those theoretical simulations beforehand is that buses are a bit overestimated and trams are underestimated in terms of the number of passengers they will attract. So the models don't take into account that people, for various reasons, prefer to take a tram over a bus. Like the capacity is also larger. It's more predictable. There's also other advantages like lower carbon dioxide emissions. But yeah, for example, what was seen in Dijon is that the passenger numbers exceeded all expectations, and also that actually at the same time the number of pedestrians in the city center increased by 10 to 20%, while the number of cars in the city center decreased by a similar degree. And actually, it was also good for the local economy, because after the installation of the tramway, there was less retail vacancies in the city center. So there were less empty shops, but there were more businesses in the city center after the tramway was introduced. So that's one important aspect. And then I will also give an example how mobility transport is related to health. So we see that often in polluted areas where there is a lot of car traffic, the rates of chronic illnesses are higher. To give one example of a study I did myself, is we looked to the cities of Brussels and Paris. They have an annual car-free day, and there it's visible that on car-free days, the concentration of nitrogen dioxide are actually 80% lower on the car-free Sundays compared to the regular Sundays. And if you would translate that into health effects, for example, asthma in children, then you see that if concentrations of nitrogen dioxide would be reduced to a similar degree every day, so not only on car-free day, but every day, then in busy trafficked areas, around 1 in 4 asthma cases in children could be prevented. So that's an example that health is also an important factor. Those were the main points I had to say, but I'm happy to discuss any questions you have.
Thank you, Bram, for teaching us a bit more on the infrastructure mobility related to not only housing, but also to health. It's also an important topic. Simon, can you a bit more here in view? Now that we had 2 presentations on one on housing, one on more the mobility aspects, we go into more some questions related to it. So if you already have a question, just raise your hand, we'll come to you. But of course, we prepared also some questions towards you, Simon. You talked about the issues with the housing typology, that, for example, now houses are often based on more families or couples, but we now see way more people, for example, living by themselves. Do you think this is the core issue within the housing crisis, or are there other, let's say, main issues within the housing crisis?
No, but I think the housing crisis has, of course, multiple routes. It is an important one, but I won't go as far as to say it's the main one. For example, today, with the rise of the interest rates, there's really a force in the housing market. People that don't should have buy their own house, they haven't bought, and so they haven't freed their own located housing unit, meaning that people who should have access to this housing unit couldn't, and so it created a lot of pressure on social housing. And so, but this conjunctural problem only accentuates the issue that I spoke about. And the crisis that we are in only strengthen the one that will come with the problems about typology, and that will grow bigger and bigger as our societal change go on and go on.
To this also related second question, as you gave now more examples of the issues in housing crisis, but you also gave a good example of how we could solve it. An example was the changing, for example, parking areas or office buildings into houses. This sounds a bit as, let's say, some places it could work, maybe 2 or 3 places, but is it really a solution? Is it scalable throughout, for example, the country in France?
It is a good question because, of course, it's not a magic wand. You won't change all the office buildings to housing lots. It's not built the same way, so you have to estimate if it's doable or not. But if you look at the Paris region, you have around more than 5 million square meters of office grounds that are unoccupied. So it's really a lot. And with this, and as you said, parking lots and so on, we could transform and adapt to some places where it's doable and interesting to help provide more housing solutions. For example, according to some studies, in this Parisian park, we could afford 300,000 people to lodge thanks to this unoccupied office space. And an important thing also is to have spaces that are not that do not have only one use. For example, you have a lot of commercial centers where you have a shop and a parking for each shop. So there's a lot of ground that is not natural, but most of the time it isn't used. So we can promote multi-use of space and of those grounds.
Also getting Bram in this conversation. Hearing all this, and you touched upon it as well, it's not just about getting accessibility to houses via public transport, but or roads for driving. The issue is, in that sense, broader with infrastructure. It's also about health. It's also about sustainability. Could you emphasize a bit more the need for taking more the green and sustainability thinking into account when we've formed solutions for mobility and the housing crisis?
Yeah, of course. So more than between 20 and 25% of greenhouse gas emissions are related to transport. You have also around 13 to 15% or so related to housing of greenhouse gas emissions. We see also that in Europe, actually, carbon dioxide emissions are decreasing in many sectors, except for transport. There, it's flat or even slightly increasing. Also because like the number of cars on the roads is still increasing every year. It's not decreasing. They become a bit cleaner over time, but becoming more. So therefore, it remains stable, more or less. So that shows why it's also important to integrate the broader sustainability aspect into the local housing and transport solutions. So it's also very important, and it's also very good for health to have a lot of bicycle paths also in new housing around new housing projects. As mentioned, public transport also, because both for climate and for health, the most beneficial is to give as much as possible space to people, to bicycles, to have green parks everywhere, and actually to try to reduce the amount of space that's allocated to road transport, to cars. That's both beneficial for health and for climate.
Thank you, Bram. I will quickly see if there are any questions from the public here. You can also ask your question in French, no problem. Or if there are any questions from the online audience. I see already here 2 questions coming to you.
Yeah, I'll just start with the main one for Bram. Yeah, you were already talking about possibly a tramway that incites a lot of different usage of, at least different uses of transport. But also you touched on cycling, and especially because I'm quite biased in my view, where I live, cycling is easy. But is it applicable everywhere? Is it everywhere applicable that you can promote cycling better by doing better paths, or are there sometimes landscape problems, cultural problems that you can run into? Or is it easy to get people to cycle? And is it that the same way that, like with the incentives for cycling, like what we call a slow lane, so a fast bicycle path essentially, instead of a tramway, is a cheaper option? Is it also an option to get people in a different mode of transport, or is that not applicable everywhere?
Let's wait with answering this question to also add the second question.
Right. So I'm wondering whether you have considered for someone in particular, but this also goes for you, Bram, the sort of origin of people crowding in cities, so to speak, because Romania has this funny thing, right? And I think a lot of Eastern Europe has this, where the rural population will just move on to the city, but that's because you cannot really go from where you are living already, right, there without, like, I don't know, either staying a lot of time on the road, which is the Romanian case, or just getting your train breaking down midway, which is a Belgian case, really. So I'm wondering, to what extent can you just decrease the pressure on the cities by implementing just a bit more transportation to the rural populations that would not really have the need to leave their place, but you are just compelled by work or those sort of things?
We'll go first to Bram and then to Simon for answering the question.
So I will try to first answer the first question. So first about cycling. So the first important point is that also know the best cycle locations, the places where bike usership is the highest. For example, Copenhagen, some Dutch cities, like 30, 40 years ago, they were also not cycling as much. So it's also because mitigation measures, because like they implemented bicycle lanes, because they introduced new projects, and gradually more and more people started to cycle, because it also became safer to cycle. Like still in many places not safe to cycle because of the car traffic, and there is certainly a lot of room for improvement in many cities. Of course, maybe in some cities there can be more barriers, especially in cities with a lot of height differences. Like, for example, imagine Lisbon or so, where like it's not flat, but it's very steep. Often, but like there, yeah, the threshold to get people cycling may be a little bit higher. A second, about the question about cycling lines versus public transport, I think, of course, it's good as much as possible people cycle, but not everyone is in the ability to cycle. Think for elderly people, or for people who are just not willing to cycle. So the best case is that you do both. You have cycling lines and you have reliable public transport. And so preferably both a tramway and both a cycling line. You see also, for example, in places in Belgium that you know often have cycling lines near the railways. So that's a good evolution. And I think, for example, for cycling, for example, in Flanders in Belgium, the goal is to have 30% of travel by bicycle by 2030, I think. Currently, it's at 18%. So there's also still some effort to do to reach that goal. Then for the second question, sorry, I don't remember exactly your question.
To what extent can you use some mobility schemes to decrease the demand on city housing by keeping the people that are in the rural populations or able to still commute to the city without having to just move in?
Yeah, that's currently often a problem because like public transport is often good in the cities, but not very much in more rural areas around. So there, it certainly would be a good solution to like make the connections between the city and like the smaller towns and the smaller villages outside the cities. Preferably if there's something like trams or trains, and also a regular connection. So preferably people don't have to look to their watch to go to the station, but like there's a tram every 10 minutes or so that they can just leave their home, go to the capital city, to another big city to work or to do other things. But therefore, we need a lot of investments in better public transport.
I might add a little thing. There's a little trap on this issue that we know quite well in France with the Paris-centric system that we have. It is that such zones, you could create what we call dormitory cities, where people just come to sleep and they work, they live in the city with this transport connection. So it's not. I don't think it's the best model to develop the territory, and it should be accompanied by the arrival of public services, of some cultural life, and so on, to encourage people to live also in the cities. And to this end, maybe some lead that we could work on is not just to link the big cities with the smaller towns, but also link the smaller towns together so they can better promote activities in their own ground.
We had a question over here.
I can speaking French. Yes. Ce que je constate, j'habite Tournai, donc une commune pas loin de Lille, mais qui est belge. Il y a énormément de nouveaux immeubles qui ont été créés, qui sont vides, qui ne parviennent pas à louer leurs appartements. Pourquoi? Parce qu'en fait, les appartements coûtent très cher. Et malgré tout, on continue à construire, pas vite, mais des immeubles qui restent vides. Et alors, on a aussi un autre problème qui est quand même assez absurde, c'est qu'on a beaucoup de gens qui ont plusieurs grands logements, mais qui n'y habitent pas. Notamment, désolé, les exilés fiscaux qui prennent leur domiciliation en Belgique, mais qui n'habitent pas en Belgique, dans les faits. Ils sont là de temps en temps, mais c'est rare. J'habite un quartier à Tournai, je vais pas dire que c'est la banlieue cossue, mais c'est certainement un des endroits les plus calmes, on va dire, qui est un critère très recherché de nos jours, quand on veut se loger et qu'on a la possibilité, la chance de pouvoir choisir un endroit. Le fait qu'il soit calme, comme on dit, c'est un critère qui est pris en compte beaucoup de nos jours. Là-bas, vous avez plein d'immeubles vides qui appartiennent à des Français très très riches, notamment là où c'est vraiment spectaculaire, c'est à Néchin, qui est un village d'Étain-Puy, pas loin de la France, où là vous avez carrément des milliardaires. Vous avez par exemple, sur les nommés, une partie de la famille Mullier, donc de Auchan. Vous avez aussi une partie de la famille de Louis Vuitton. Ça n'a pas toujours des effets négatifs, parce qu'on a créé une entreprise Louis Vuitton qui fait de la maroquinerie 100% artisanale, donc juste à la frontière en Belgique, avec des travailleurs belges. Donc ça n'a pas toujours des effets négatifs, parce qu'il faut croire que là, ils sont peut-être plus souvent en Belgique, je ne sais pas. Bien sûr, on a eu d'autres anecdotes comme Depardieu, tout ça, hein, qui une fois habité à Étain-Puy, une fois habité, bon, peu importe. C'est aussi pour échapper à l'impôt. Ce que je voulais en venir, c'est que donc on a des choses ahurissantes. Par exemple, on a un village près de Tournai qui s'appelle Quin, où il y a énormément de villas vides. Il y a des belles villas hein, qui sont surveillées et entretenues. Et donc, Je pense que c'est vraiment un problème, c'est une injustice par rapport à ceux qui ont du mal à trouver un logement. Et ça rejoint ce que tu dis. C'est comment faire. Donc, la mobilité à la tournée est aussi un vrai problème. Parce qu'à part les bus, il n'y a rien. Rien. À part les bus, il n'y a rien. Et les taxis coûtent une fortune. Bon, bref. Et donc, pour abréger, ce que je voulais dire, c'est que je pense qu'il faudrait revoir certaines choses, même au niveau européen. Que même au niveau, bon, bien sûr, peut-être pas tous les pays européens, bien sûr, parce que c'est bien qu'il y a certains pays qui seraient réticents, etc. Bon. On va dire dans les pays les plus pro-européens, des pays européens, et essayer de trouver des solutions qui peuvent être prises que par plusieurs pays européens, et pas un seul pays européen. Enfin, voilà. Je ne sais pas ce que tu en penses par rapport à tous ces logements qui sont... Parce que chez nous, ce n'est pas comme en France, ce n'est pas les bureaux qui sont vides, c'est les habitations. Voilà.
Thank you.
So-
If you have time to translate this.
So, as a Belgian person, I have had experience. I have two main problems. The first one is, although there's like a lot of new housing and apartments that are built, for example, as Tournai in the Delnik in southern Belgium, there's a lot of new buildings being built, but the housing and the renting prices are so high, very little people are being able to get there, and the prices are not affordable for the average citizen in Belgium. Another problem that's more specific to Belgium is that a lot of people use Belgium as a fiscal residency to pay less taxes. So they have a house, they rent houses, but they let them empty for the entirety of the year, which causes entire neighborhoods, especially in Tournai, that are just empty, but are just used as fiscal residency, but are empty. People do not live there, but they're still, by occupying them, they still increase the price of the actual housing. What are the actual solutions that could be put in places to fix and, of course, attenuate the consequences of those kinds of problems?
I think that there are several things that we can leverage on this issue. It's always complex, and I don't have a single answer on this. But there are some ways that we can explore. For example, on empty housings, in France there exists a tax on empty housing units, so which could always be raised and also be implemented in other European countries. If people are very rich, they will pay the tax, and it won't matter that much, but it's still more money in the housing for the state. And if there is really a dire situation around a town, a city, there are some towns that are saying that if housing units are unoccupied for too much time a year, they can buy it and use it then as a social housing unit. It's a bit controversial because you take, so to say, by force, because people don't want to sell, but in areas where there's really a lot of tension of the housing market, this could be a tool. And about the buildings of new housing lots that are not used, it's a bit also why you are building them and what is your model. So, for example, there's something that I really find interesting. Sorry for the English translation, I don't know the English counterpart, but in France it's bail réel solidaire. So it comes from a system of community landlords in Anglo-Saxon countries. The principle being that you buy the house, but you buy only the building. You don't buy the ground. So the inflation of prices that comes with a new tramway line being built near your house, it won't affect the price of such bail réel solidaire. You will only pay a small fee to the organism that is owning the ground, but it achieves much smaller prices for accessing property. So that could be a model that could be developed to lower prices.
I hope this answers the question that was raised. Are there any more questions from here or the online audience?
All right, so I'm curious for housing in particular, if we know some numbers on exactly how the dynamics of people renting works. Because like, okay, you have a lot of students, right, that you would, at the moment, basically have them look for houses all over the place, like wherever you can find, you take. And then families who basically do the same thing, but they, in a way, get to benefit normally from more work for home arrangements and that type of stuff, and like do need more space. So there would be, I would say, more suited for like outskirts. While students, you can normally have a lot of student complexes and that type of stuff. The Amsterdamers have a lot of those things, but it's that they are rarely ever built for whatever reason, and most of the houses that are like happening around just go structure under big corporations and that sort of thing. So I'm wondering whether it wouldn't be more suitable to have an arrangement of, okay, for cities have sort of specific spaces just for students, like student complexes getting built and everything, so that families won't have to compete with 5 students in like one apartment to have prices, if that makes sense.
Definitely makes sense. The answer is maybe a bit more difficult, but
It's of course a tough issue. No, there are indeed housing buildings that are student residential that are linked to high schools, universities, and so on. So that's something that could be developed also, because when you're arriving in the new town to find, as a student, to find housing, it's not always easy to find a grasp and to know how to do, where do I search, how do I begin. So if you have some help and structure provided by your university, it simplifies things, and as you said, it can divide the demand between families and students. After that, I would say that if we have a good division in typology between student lots and more spacious lots for families, for example, the division should be natural, but today it is not. When you're in dire need for a housing lot, if it's too big, but you have the means, you take it. So for me, it could be regulated a bit naturally if we solve the whole thing, I believe.
any last questions from the audience? Otherwise, I might have a question.
Whoa.
Yeah, for you, one of the first things that you said is that when a new area is built, that it should be with infrastructure first. The problem, I think, with that is like at least the direction I think we should be going as a society is not towards urban sprawl. And especially when that's the case, it's only an opportunity when you are actually having urban sprawl. So, yeah, do you think that's a bit of a paradox, or what do you think the priority should be in that? Should new areas be developed with perfect infrastructure, or should the priority just be densification? And yeah, which helps with a lot of other advantages.
The risk of urban sprawl by creating more public transport also outside of the city and then more residents being built there. Either that or more focus on what we already have from cities in making more dense.
So it's trying to have a different answer from me and Bram, I suppose. No, I think housing is difficult to have a national strategy that says in every city we do this and this. It should also be adaptable to the local situation. If there's some, for example, in France, if you look at cities that are really growing fast, I think of near Toulouse or Montpellier in the south, where with the aerospatial industry, it's really growing fast. There, yes, maybe developing new housing projects outside the town from scratch with proper infrastructure, public services, and public transportation is the best answer. For places like Paris that are already overcrowded and where there's a urban expansion that is really vast, maybe I would prioritize the other way in using in the best way that we can the space that is already not artificial. I don't know, Bram.
Yeah. Also, of course, I also think densification is of course a good thing where it's possible. So we should certainly aim for more densification. That's certain. But the case is also that like now often new housing projects are built somewhere in a place, and then I think it's much better to think about transportation there too, because that reduces let's say the negative impacts of urban sprawl a lot. Because if you make sure that, of course, if you make sure that people can like travel in a sustainable way, there can easily travel to the city without using a car, that reduces the negative effects of urban sprawl a lot. And but of course, one aim should also be to reduce urban sprawl in itself. So, of course, it's best that new housing projects are not built in a very remote location, but like in a town or like in a place where already a lot of housing is clustered together.
I will slowly work towards an end of this first part of the session today. We had already many questions, and we are here with Volt European Party. And I know that in March 2026, actually, municipality elections will take place here in France. Maybe, who knows, nothing is certain yet, but maybe Volt will participate locally, and housing and transport is probably an issue. I don't know if the program is already fully fixed, but if there is at least one thing that you think here in Lille would be a very good idea for Volt to say on housing and on mobility here in Lille. Bit putting you on the spot, but...
That's where the national policies, when again, is in difficulty. No. I would say, from my part, that it's not really related directly to the issues we spoke about today. It's housing still. But I think one of the main issues in France is about renovation of buildings. So to adapt them to climate change and to save energy, and also be better adapted to heat wave in summer. And I spoke with some person in Lille that lives in quite old buildings, and in the summer, when the really hard heat waves, it's like hell in their apartments. So I think that accelerating and continued support on this topic is important not only for climate, but just for the health and the livability of our housings.
And on the mobility side, I know you don't live here in Lille, but maybe you still have an idea?
I think maybe not specifically for Lille, because you, of course, have already a lot of transportation systems, but in general, I think it's a good idea to replicate what they did in Dijon. They built a tramway only 12 years ago, and there are many cities with a similar population size, with a similar geographical size, that could really benefit from building a new tram network. I think, for example, Leuven, Mechelen in Belgium, but also some other cities in France with a similar size as Dijon, where they don't have a tram system yet. That could be very beneficial to build one.
And you made me think of it, but in Lille, we have been advocating for linking with public transport the Belgian cities that are near the border, so Tournai and Kortrijk. I don't know how to utter it in Dutch, but that's something that should have been done since years or decades, and that we really advocate for.
With that being said, I think we had an amazing discussion on housing mobility, not only on the European, national, but also on the local level. And with that being said, I think we come to a close of this first hour of the session today. I want to make many thanks to, of course, Bram and Simon for your insights on housing and mobility. And of course, your talks and answering the questions. Of course, the thank you to the online audience and all the people here who came here to listen today and ask all the questions. Here we'll continue in a second part after a short break with, I believe, a small policy workshop, one in French speaking and one in English speaking. For the online audience, we won't have any facility for that. So we hope you still really liked to tune in. And as I said at the beginning, this is an event, part of an event series, each month with a different thematic community in a different country. Next month, we will be in the Netherlands with the agriculture and food community. And probably the month after that, we'll be in Copenhagen in Denmark with the climate and energy community and the foreign affairs community, and many more events are being planned. With that, thank you for tuning in and listening to us today.
Thanks.